Hello, everyone. So welcome back for our penultimate session of the day. And in this session, we're actually going to be taking a step back and we're going to be looking at the impact of AI for public good. The impact that it has on the UK economy. We'll delve into the significance of AI ecosystems in driving innovation and look also at where the UK's strengths and opportunities lie. We again have a really exciting panel, and it is led by Karen McCluskey, who works for the UK government. She is the first diplomat with a tech portfolio and now leads on tech for the Department of Business and Trade. But I have been told that she is not wearing her work hat today, so we cannot hold her officially to any opinions, which are all just her opinions personally, and infer nothing from any line of questioning. So please do give us a big round of applause for our panel on AI for public good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, when ChatGPT burst on the scene more or less 2 years ago, it ignited a conversation about security and safety in AI. And that conversation, rightly in my view, dominated for quite some time. But now, particularly as that conversation continues to evolve and mature, and regulatory and legislative approaches are also coming through, the use cases have been coming through as well. Adoption is happening now. And possibly the biggest risk of AI is that we don't take advantage of those opportunities as they arise. The biggest risk is that we miss the chance to find cures for diseases that would make a huge difference, not just in the UK, but around the world, that we don't harness AI to other global challenges, such as climate change. So we're going to use, as a panel, we're going to take this opportunity to stand back and look at the opportunities. And I'm going to start, if I may, with David Hogan, who I don't think needs a lot of introduction in this room, but is one of the VPs at NVIDIA and was there right from the beginning as well, growing NVIDIA into what became, of course, briefly one of the most valuable company in the world this year. And David, I'd like to start with an opportunity that few countries have, which is an opportunity to obtain something which gets called AI sovereignty. That's not an uncontroversial term. Why don't you break it down for us?
Yeah, so good afternoon, everybody. So I think you need to think about the value that individual countries, organizations, and even citizens have in their own information. I like to sort of quote our CEO, Jensen, in a conversation he had with Premier Modi, where he started to talk about, how do I think about sovereign AI? What does it actually mean? So in India, he was thinking something he could relate to, and that was the production of bread, which is a key staple in India. So if you think about it, you produce grain, you produce flour. Now, in Modi's idea, so he was thinking, well, right now, I export my flour, and then I buy back the bread. And the question is, should you bake your own bread? And that's a very simple way of looking at it. The UK and many other European countries have huge amounts of data and insight and IP that's built the industries we have, the public bodies we have, etc., which is hugely valuable and represents the culture and the values of the organizations that we work with and the citizens that we have. And therefore, we need to really think about how we use that for the benefit of society, but also for the benefit of the industries that are based here. And I think the UK has a huge opportunity to harness that industrial past and use the data that's been sat there in data warehouses that we all know about, really driving no value to suddenly turn that into new business models, new ideas, the way of transforming public bodies such as the NHS or HMRC or all these different organizations that we all rely on. There's a great opportunity to really harness that and start to drive increases in productivity and really transform the way we drive our economy going forward. So I think we've got a huge opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to today's panel.
Thank you. Stian, you've advised, I think, 3 different ministers over the terms of your career, and you now head up a very important or essential research body in AI. Does this notion of AI sovereignty make much sense to you?
So I think this issue that David's raised is incredibly important. I think it's a real opportunity for the UK, a country that has great tech skills broadly, great AI skills specifically, to say, how can we really make the most of all the assets that we have? I think this idea of the data sets that we own, the sovereign data sets, the government-owned data sets, how to selectively, carefully, but enthusiastically make them available for the right kind of training models, AI analysis, is incredibly important. It's something that we are very concerned in our work at ESRC, and I think there's some real opportunities when we look at, for example, I recently worked on a government expert advisory group that was trying to see what is the value of our sovereign data sets in the context of AI to make sure
Stian,
that we...
can I just ask you to explain what is a sovereign data set
I'm
for
sorry.
everyone? Yeah.
This was the language. This may be a last government thing. They may have changed the language. The last government used sovereign data sets to mean public sector owned data sets, and who knows why they picked exactly that word. But if you want to think of it, data sets that the government has owned or created. But the opportunity to use those and the opportunity to make sure that we get the most value from them for the taxpayer and for the citizen, I think is a really big opportunity.
Yeah, undoubtedly. I'd like to pull apart now this central question of growth. That is the opportunity that this government is chasing. There are, I think, some fundamentals to growth that I invite you to explore. But then I think there's also a question of how we achieve growth. We all know some of the inputs, but how do we get to the outputs? Kerry, I know that a lot of the work you've been doing recently is focused on skills. How do we create the skills? What is the skills strategy to achieve AI sovereignty?
Afternoon, everyone. Gosh, that's a big question. Because like a lot of us here and the talent in the room, a lot of us have been snapped up and are working on these policies, approaches, and so forth. But, you know, every business, big, small, medium, large, startup, thinking about it needs to have an AI-enabled workforce. It's not good enough to wait. And that's at various different levels, so everyone has to understand the fundamentals. What are the fundamentals of AI for business? Firstly and foremost, we all need to move more to be data aware, data savvy. I'm not asking that everyone's a data scientist. If you can be, that's great, but everyone's going to have to be able to interrogate data, understand data. I think going forwards, we may see job titles pop up, data cleanser, for example, that may come into the fore. And then it's looking at, you know, from the board downwards, we're starting to see I won't say the word dearth, you know, within these four walls, but who is providing the challenge to who here? We know that boards needs to go on an education programme. There is some fantastic talent out there, but again, it's in short supply currently. It's not the norm by any means. Who on the senior leadership teams, the chief exec teams, are providing that challenge back? And where is this leadership across whole organisational workforces? I mean, we do hear, oh, let's just plug some co-pilot in here or there. That's not going to cut it by any means. And it is those, I'd say, small pockets that have really got a handle of the various different levels of expertise that you require that will be running ahead with it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think a lot of companies have been used to, a lot of C-suites have been used to leaving this stuff to the IT department. It's not the IT department, right? This is central business strategy now. This is main thing, and every single board member and leader needs to be able to speak confidently on these issues and ask questions confidently as well. How else do we get to the AI dividend? What else needs to happen?
So it's not just about education and training, although clearly that's a big part of it. It's looking at the opportunity for those who've got that training. So in the UK, we have some of the best compute schools in the world, some of the best data scientists. And the obvious thing is to say that, you know, they're going to go and chase the salaries and fly across the Atlantic or to the Middle East or into Asia and just chase the opportunity that's there. Well, whilst that is true to some extent, actually, the real opportunity is to give them the opportunity to do life-changing work. Most of these people do PhDs in this industry to really transform the use cases, transform outcomes for society. That's why they do it. They're interested in the work. So providing we can find opportunities in the UK economy for people to develop their careers, to really advance science, to advance the field in which they're working on, they will stay in the UK and they will help grow the UK. The challenge we have right now is those opportunities out there. So the point we need to really raise is how do we educate the boards of organizations and other bodies to really understand the potential and how we can develop talent and give them the opportunity to grow within the UK economy.
And NVIDIA's right in the middle of it, right? You are creating those skills right across the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's right. So NVIDIA has an approach. We're a little bit different than most sort of US tech companies, and with respect to my colleague over there, is that NVIDIA is trying to make the market for AI. So what we're trying to do is enable everybody to benefit from AI. We have one of our core values is democratize access to AI, and therefore we work with developers, millions of developers around the world every day, trying to help them develop and actually develop AI models, etc. But we also work with startups, we work with governments, with lots of different organizations really to enable them to transform. We have something called the Deep Learning Institute, which is a training program which works from the deepest developers about how to build frontier models right the way to chief execs about how do they think about AI, what is the opportunity and threat to my business, how do I transform my industry, how do I remain competitive. The challenge we face in the UK and Europe is the US and Asia went much quicker with this wave, so how do we catch up? And our opportunity lies in what I said at the beginning is actually it's our IP, it's our data. Those things give us the opportunity. If we can align that with talent, then I think we can have a big impact.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, forgive me if I'm oversimplifying, but is AI's sovereignty, that notion, not resting more simply on a question of compute access? Isn't that what it really comes down to in terms of a country's ability to claim AI sovereignty?
Compute is important, but obviously I would say that. But actually, no, it's true. I mean, the biggest challenge is access to compute for people to develop these models. A lot of the compute that's been deployed in the last sort of 18 months of Gen AI has been in North America and has been in Asia. So actually, it has been a big challenge to have platforms out there. But also, it's about really the ability to leverage that to develop software and have that insight to do it. It's not just about compute, but it's about how to utilize that, build the skills and capability in order to be able to realize the vision.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, and hi everyone. So I think, just building on that, like one of the ways that we think about democratizing access to AI is making the models and the foundational technology as open as possible. So the Llama AI models that Meta provides are open source. You can go on the internet. When you get home, you can go and download some of the smaller models. You can run them on your own laptop if you want to do that. You can go on Hugging Face and find this really vibrant community of people who are building with them. But the point here is to make sure that everybody has the ability to play with the models and be creative and put them to use in their businesses. And to connect it to the sovereignty point, what's really interesting here is that if you want to, and there are certain, I think, environments where this is important, you can run that model on your own infrastructure. Mm-hmm. You can keep it entirely within the walls of your organization if you don't want the data to be over the internet and through an API, and that's important for some people and less important for others. But the point is to have choice and competition in the marketplace here.
Thank you. So, David, I'd like to pick up on a point you made, but throw it, if I may, to Stian. You talked about the first digital wave, which I call AI readiness. But other people might call the adoption of some quite basic enterprise software, things like CRM or electronic invoicing or human resources type functions, back office functions. And there's a funny phenomena in the UK which nobody quite understands, and that's that although the UK consistently is marked by most metrics about third for innovation in globally speaking, including on AI. When it comes to knowledge adoption, or knowledge sort of percolation, when it comes to productivity and when it comes to adoption of new technologies, the UK ranks about 20th, so way behind OECD competitors. And there's no simple answer to that, but I think we can all see that if you don't catch the first wave, how are you going to catch the second wave? Stian, what do you make of that?
It's a kind of long-standing question that people ask about British businesses generally, not just in relation to AI. Why do some businesses not adopt technologies? Some of it is down to, again, stuff that's not technological. It's down to management issues, for example, just general management skills and willingness to adopt things. The way to address that is probably just training, skills, better adoption of those technologies will come from those better training and skills. I think something else that's maybe really non-obvious here, and again doesn't seem very technological, is to do with where businesses are located. We know that a lot of AI expertise in a country like the UK is in a fairly limited number of places. It's in London, it's in clusters like Cambridge and Oxford. Those are some of the most expensive cities to run a business in, to employ people in Europe, if not the world. So actually getting some of the basics right there, making it cheaper for people to live and to work in these clusters, which at the moment are very constrained by planning, will allow that kind of interflow of ideas, the exchange of people that will make businesses better at taking up on those ideas. This has got very little to do with technology, but a lot to do with how technology gets taken up.
That's fascinating. Is that something that rings bells with you as well, Kerry, in terms of, I feel like we're going back to education. It's sort of all sounding familiar.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's, remain relevant, or you're going to have to ultimately move over, because if you don't, someone else will. I think that's a bit of a mantra out there. But just to pick up on your point on clusters, we often hear the phrase levelling up. I'll park whatever people may think of that there. But we are starting to see a very small move to address that problem with some of the councils. We're working with the local small business chambers of commerce, etc. They're going in, inviting people even within the community to try and support that. Whether that will have economic revenues, who knows, but that is a start.
But this is right at the nub of the question, economic dividend, because this government and the UK, you might argue, cannot afford to wait for a dividend. Is there a dichotomy, therefore? Is there a choice between investing in small and medium-sized businesses that need to catch a first wave? Would we see better gains in economy there than we might get, certainly within a 10-year framework of investing in a supercomputer? How do you make these choices given the fiscal context, Chris?
Yeah, good question. Good job I'm not a minister as well, because that's a hard question.
I know. I'm hoping you'll give me the answer to take home.
So I think, I think there's a few things to say here. One is you want to get a lot of the foundations right, as Stian and others have described. I think some of this is to recognize that it's not always an either-or question, right? So when I think about platforms like ours, we've been using AI and machine learning for an awful long time, and it's what helps us to run these platforms at enormous scale. Haven't always called it AI, but it is. But the benefit there is actually felt in the wider economy, because it's the long tail of small businesses that benefit from the technologies on our platform to reach customers and build businesses that wouldn't have existed otherwise. And all of that is getting more effective as well. So I think on the one hand, yes, you need the skills and you need the creativity and the engineers. On the other side of it, you just need tools in the hands of people who own and operate businesses. And you don't need a computer science PhD. Actually, the software is getting easier and easier if you've got the right mindset. So I think you need both of those things. And I think part of this, you have to think about trusting the market in here as well. There are things government can and should do around the foundations, but there's also areas where it needs to probably step a little bit out of the way.
Mm-hmm. But there are some that argue that, particularly when it comes to AI, perhaps less so with other frontier technologies, that a small number of US companies have captured so much of the value chain that delivering growth for everybody is, it's not really going to be the outcome. That we're talking about growth, we're talking about profits for companies, the likes of which, in terms of size and power, we have never seen before in human history. I'd like to dive into competition, and because we can all agree that competition is what breeds ultimately innovation and a healthy ecosystem. Where, perhaps I'll give you guys to think about your lobbying points, and I'll go to Stian first and ask, where do big tech and small tech interests begin to diverge with this?
So, I think I would cautiously challenge the idea that we would see a kind of a triumph of big tech at the expense of citizens and at the expense of other companies. I think one thing that we see across the board in tech, time and time again, is that big companies arise. They arise because of some of the effects of the way these technologies reward scale. But then these big companies, kind of like the dinosaurs, have these extinction events, and the next big company takes them over. So I think this idea of a kind of punctuated model where you see companies rising and then, not to scare anyone here, but companies do get challenged and they fall, gives us some reassurance. And all along, huge benefits accrue to consumers. We know economists have measured the benefits that large tech platforms bring to people. They are very significant, often that people don't pay for, but they really highly value. There's also, I think, a huge benefit to small companies, not least because even where big companies acquire small companies, which is something that we know happens, that provides a significant motivation for investment in small companies. It provides an exit route for entrepreneurs, and it provides, at least so far, a pretty healthy economy where businesses keep getting founded, innovations keep getting made, and the system keeps on working. So obviously, we should be cautious about monopoly. We don't want one big tech company running everything in perpetuity. But I think we should also caution ourselves about the incentive to jump in too quickly and to try and stop things. Because I think, we may overread warning signs that aren't actually there.
Mm-hmm. So you see a healthy sector at the moment with a good competition.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at so the traditional problem with monopolies is you'll have one very big company that is frankly kind of fat, dumb and happy, not doing very much for its consumers, not innovating very much. When I look at AI, that's absolutely not what I see. I see furious competition between companies continually trying to bring out, for example, new large language models, people working extremely hard, and lots of interesting startups. So This is not the monopolistic situation that we saw in the 1960s and 1970s in other industries.
Interesting. I was expecting the counterpoint, but we might be in boring agreement here. But still, explain to me that this is not a problem.
Maybe this could come. So broadly, I agree. So there isn't a broad thing. What I would say though is, it is about, for the majority of organisations, it is about an ecosystem. So whilst there are a few organisations in the world that are fully capable of building some of these things end to end, in reality, for most organisations, you need an ecosystem. You need developers, you need startups, you need the collaboration with higher education, and then you need the industry itself or the government department executive to come together and collaborate to bring these things to life. Because it's always the last mile, the complexity of that industry, the complexity of the use case, the use of that particular data that really makes a difference. And there's very few organizations in the world who have that amount of resources, et cetera, to build that for every different use case in every different industry around the world. So I think there's a huge opportunity to collaborate. So we broadly agree, but I think it's a broader play.
Indeed, the ecosystem approach. And of course, Meta has an incredibly unique approach to feeding the ecosystem.
Yeah, that's right. So like I mentioned earlier, we made the decision to make sure that our foundation models are open source. So they are freely available with a very permissive license for people to use. You can take those, you can amend them, fine-tune them, deploy them in your company or your organization as you wish. But we think this is a really important part of having this vibrant, healthy, competitive marketplace for the technology. And we don't think that a vision where one company controls the AI and that's the be-all and end-all is a good outcome for anybody. But people often ask me, like, why on earth would Meta invest so much money in building these models and then give them away for free? And the answer is, it's good for everybody, right? So it is amazing for developers and startups because you can access this technology that you could never afford to build for yourselves. It's good for wider society because it has more competition, which drives innovation. And it's good for us because when you've got a large number of developers working on this technology, then they innovate, they come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things, and we can recycle some of that back into our business as well. So we've done this historically with lots of things that we've built previously, and we think it's incredibly important.
I think I would just caveat that. I mean, we're working our way towards regulation in the UK, EU AI Act 2026 and so forth, and elsewhere wider across the world. There's definitely a requirement, in my view, I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else here, to have more SMEs involved in some of the standards development, which will ultimately become, I'll say good practice, I won't say best practice, because that is gold-plated standard beyond the lawyers, we'll say good practice, to have their views and their ideas reflected in that, because it is well known that some of these standard-making groups, they are chaired by some of the big players. So, if AI is not representative of those it serves, we shouldn't have it, and we should just say no. So I think there is still more work to be done to incorporate SME voices and diversity of thought and thinking.
Could you unpack that a bit further for us? Where do you think in regulation, I think you said standards, but I'm not sure I understood, where do big tech and small tech interests begin to diverge in regulatory affairs?
Well, I'm sure there are. I'm sure they're all lobbying left, right and centre for these policy developments. To start with, lots of the big companies are part of government advisory groups, as you know. I think you've all got representation here or a voice up and so forth. But it is about bringing, those smaller ones in. That can be sometimes quite complex with, many are popping up all over the place. And it takes them to get to a point before they're known, before they might get acquired, and then they might pop off and move over, etc. So just going back to standards are becoming more into the fore. You've all heard of the Alan Turing Institute, which I supported to develop its current 5-year strategy. There is the AI Standards Hub, particularly for the EU AI Act. The race is on to have these standards supporting the regulatory approach, and hopefully there will become, look to good practice going forwards. But definitely there needs to be more views in developing those, because otherwise we go back to square one.
Right, and SMEs certainly need support in that sense in getting their voice heard. But Stian, do you see differences of substance in terms of regulations because there's been a great deal of talk over the last year of regulatory capture by big tech as well. Is that something, describe what that means, if you will, for the audience, or what the fear is, and whether you believe in it yourself?
So I think this is absolutely a risk, and this is something I saw a lot in government across a range of areas. If you set out an aspiration to regulate something, the nature of things that anyone who has an economic interest in that, which is in particular anyone who makes money out of that or thinks they might make money, will have an interest in lobbying government to make things better. I saw this a lot. This was before people talked that much about AI, but I saw this a lot in relating to copyright and rights holders, which is obviously now a super hot issue when it comes to AI. And we would regularly have meetings where we had Alphabet and other companies with an interest in using AI on one side of the table, and we'd have rights holders on the other side of the table. And, frankly, neither of those groups, both of those groups had strong interests at their heart. Google and other companies wanted to be able to use other people's intellectual property as costlessly as possible. Rights holders wanted to maximize the value they got for their rights in perpetuity. And, there's a strong reason why it's useful to have some ability to reuse others' intellectual property. There's a strong reason why rights holders should have some protection. But it was a real challenge for government to balance those interests. And actually, if you're saying what's the job that government should do here, it's to have the skills to do that. What makes this especially hard is that some of those rights holders' interests, we've been having those debates for 10, 20 years, so people sort of knew what was at stake. With AI, things are moving so fast that it's very hard to provide those skills within government to be able to adjudicate those arguments. So this is a really tough thing to regulate at all, and a really tough thing to regulate well.
Right, and it's not just business interests at stake. There's that question of national security, questions around national sort of sovereign capability, and geopolitics. So that that runs alongside balancing those interests. Chris, I thought do you have a point you wanted to add on there? Well, Chris or David, we hear a lot for a demand for pro-business regulation. Why would anyone want anything other than pro-business regulation? What does it really mean at this stage with AI?
Yeah, I think one of the ways to think about this is, as we said, it's a very fast-moving technology in a fast-moving environment. And so one of the risks that you've got when you set the regulatory framework is that you are too quick to firm up, and then it's hard to anticipate how things are going to play out.
Right.
And one of the things you're seeing at the moment, actually, is UK, I think, is taking a reasonably positive, constructive way through this. You've got a bunch of regulators in different sectors, recognise that they all need to understand AI and probably up their game a little bit, but also understand that the technology will be used in different parts of the economy, and people who are smart and understand that should go and look carefully at it. Contrast that with some of the developments in the EU recently, where what you're seeing at the moment is across the industry, a lot of nervousness about bringing the most advanced AI technologies into the EU market. So our most advanced llama models are not available to use in the EU.
Right.
And that comes down to a fragmented and slightly uncertain regulatory environment where you've got a number of different organizations who all have a perspective on it, who all can't agree on it and can't give the industry certainty about how to proceed. And so when you're sitting on this side of the fence,
yes.
you look at that and you say, I want to bring this technology to Europe, and as a European, I really think it would do an awful lot in terms of economic and social benefits. But it's very hard if we don't have certainty from the regulators about how we'll be treated. So some of this, that's a long way of saying pro-business often means give us some certainty and stability so we understand where the guardrails are.
I suppose the EU would argue they have delivered a certainty of black and white letters on a page. It's the science and the evolving ecosystem that adds the uncertainty. Perhaps it's a circle we're never going to square. But if I may sort of continue this line of close to the edge questioning, NVIDIA, also a company who has not necessarily fallen in line with government attempts at regulation or directives to support geopolitical policy. What do you think? I mean, has the EU got it good enough? Is this going to go the way GDPR did and just simply set a gold standard that inevitably others will follow?
That's a complex question, but I think ultimately, there's always unintended consequences. People are trying to obviously protect citizens and do those things, but actually the speed of innovation, which was talked about, is so fast. What we very much believe in is aligning to the speed of innovation. So regulate as you proceed, as you go into different areas of the economy and start to really understand from subject matter experts how that would be impacted and regulate appropriately. And the guiding principle we have in NVIDIA is there's lots of good regulation out there for humans, right? We all need a driving license. Doctors need to be qualified, all those sort of things. There are great principles out there that we already have in society. Use those as a guiding principle and then say, how would you apply that if an AI agent was doing that on your behalf? And it should be better than a human doing that, and often the case is true. So how do you think about doing that and how do you apply? But a blanket approach to every potential scenario is very, very difficult to manage, gives great uncertainty, but also stifles development of AI, particularly if you compare that to other regions of the world. So we would broadly align with what's been said already.
Kerry, what do you think means pro-business regulation?
I think I would sort of agree to slightly disagree with that, not to take on the tech giants, because I'm sure they earn a lot more than me, so I might be asking you for a job at some point. I'm part of the UK government AI Taskforce team, actively supporting the 90-plus regulators in the UK to develop their approach to regulation. Machine learning developer by background, so there's teams of tech professionals, non-tech, standards, academics, consumer groups, you name it, and so forth. And we currently think we can do it under current legislative requirements, so we're not looking for any law just yet. That might be a point in the future, and it was referenced in the King's speech about the possible AI bill. We do believe that the principles-based approach, so the 5 principles, appropriate transparency, accountability, explainability, but as long as they're safe, secure, robust, you then get to fairness. So it's about being outcomes-based. We're not saying you can't use AI at all, like the EU AI Act has banned certain AI systems, for example. We're saying you can use it even in high-risk systems. So energy, for example, the grid, quite scary going forward. It could have catastrophic consequences for all of us. If we don't keep the lights on, without energy, there isn't any AI, for example. Nuclear power, aviation, right down to, frontline plug-in tools for improved consumer experience. And I think it's just worthwhile looking at some of the functional safety elements and frameworks. How do you drive down that risk to an acceptable level? So I don't think we are saying no. We're saying, innovate as much as you can. Come and play in the sandboxes or perhaps the soon-to-be AI regs labs. It just needs to have good or risk-based governance approach, and you need to satisfy these criteria. I will carry that with fair outcomes. It's very difficult to determine. A lot of academics have told in a nutshell, that's really difficult. Okay, determine unfairness. Again, you can argue that whichever way, and when you speak to the lawyers, it gets even more complex. So, I would suggest speaking to the regulators, seeing what elements they've got in place. But what it will mean is regulators will have to have a more of a non-fixed mindset going forwards.
Yep.
We're moving into that agile, adaptive regulation where that constant feedback loop. Okay, we want to put this in, this is a bit high risk, let's look at it. This is the feedback. Well, that does mean we need to update the guidance. Guidance is voluntary, it's not mandatory, because there's laws you need to operate in currently. There's a lot of laws protecting the data in the UK as it is, so yeah.
We've somehow ended up where often the conversation on AI ends up, which is in a slightly sort of negative space of control and the challenges within that. But I'm determined to have this conversation end where we began, which is in the sense of opportunity. And I certainly feel a sense of wonder nearly every day at work. And the thing I like best is when I have the opportunity, as I occasionally do, to actually go out to a lab, see what people are working on, and see the stuff that is just about to emerge over the horizon. It makes getting up and doing my job worthwhile. So I'd like to invite the panel, just by lifting the veil a little on what they are seeing. They have a particularly privileged position of some of the use cases and innovations that are coming through, and to share them with you today.
I guess the thing that's kind of, well, it's not necessarily super sort of exciting in terms of that, but really something that's really realized the power of AI is something we're doing at NVIDIA, which is building a digital twin of the Earth. It's called Earth 2. And we're now in a position where we can reduce the time to forecast very significant weather events such as the recent hurricanes, etc. And taking it from a matter of, being able to predict things maybe 1 or 2 days, 3 days, 5 days out, to be able to see these weather patterns develop and being able to forecast things weeks in advance. And we're now starting to see this really transformative. If you think of the impact of weather, it's in the hundreds of billions on the world economy every year. So the ability to predict this ahead of time is very, very significant. In addition to that, that allows us to also look at long-term climate change. So look at the impact of different events and also simulate them. So if we did certain things, we reduce certain types of pollution or whatever, what would the impact be over what time frame? So for me, that gives me great hope in terms of the opportunity that gives humanity to actually deal with one of our biggest challenges. So not necessarily super cheerful, but actually
that's
very
huge.
Meaningful.
I've worked in disaster relief, particularly on the typhoon that hit the Philippines back in 2016, and the thought of what a few more weeks could do for warning and preparation, that's incredible. Kerry, what's been capturing your imagination?
I think that leads me on nicely. It goes back to without any energy, there isn't any AI. There's a lot of discourse out there about carbon outputs. If anyone's got a good measurement tool that's accurate or anywhere near effective, please do come and speak to me, because I've heard a lot of puff about all these tools being made to measure it, and there isn't common consensus yet. But I think for me, just picking up on what you said about sort of future forecasting, particularly solar forecasting, to support the energy stocks, the optimisation, and also reduce energy wastage is really exciting. I mean, the energy sector in the UK and globally is going to undergo mass transformation. Hopefully the pace does increase, particularly as we move to more smart homes, more smarter ways of living. The pressure on the grid and the pressure on energy stocks is going to be quite significant, and there are possible concerns about it into the future with the shift in behaviours, on-demand pricing from energy companies. I was speaking to one just the other day. They think that they're going to move away from sort of general tariffs based on consumptions to individual tariffs per home. What does that actually mean for the stocks going forward? So anything that can support with that. Otherwise, we haven't even got any AI. I think it's really exciting.
A kind of a small but perfectly formed use case for AI that we've been doing some work on recently is on, this is going to sound very geeky, AI for evidence synthesis. So if you think about people who are making public policy to save the climate or address public health challenges or fight violence against women and girls or whatever your policy area. There's a ton of research out there done over the years by all sorts of very worthy scientists to look at how things can work. But it's quite impenetrable. It's written up in academic journals. You don't know what to read, what to believe. What's happened historically is we paid academics to synthesize that, try and translate it into language that policymakers can understand and get it more use. So it makes policy more evidence-based. The problem is it's very time-consuming, and academics don't really like doing it because it's not very creative. But this is a tool where there's been some really interesting work done by a range of academics about using large language models and other AI tools to try and synthesize this. And there's been some really promising results so far. It's not exactly as good as a very good evidence synthesizer yet, but we, along with the Wellcome Trust, have just made a 5-year investment that, among other things, is looking at developing this. And although I wouldn't put my money on it being ready in a month, I would not bet against AI in 60 months' time, in 5 years, being able to do amazing evidence synthesis.
Are you talking exclusively science research or arts and humanities as well?
This is social sciences, this is
Wow.
across the board. So, you know, this is about taking the stuff that's buried in academic journals that taxpayers are paid for and that really people have done with the desire to help humanity to make the world a better place, that often just gets wasted, it doesn't get read, to try and take it, to synthesize it and to make it understandable. So it's a kind of small but I think really useful example of where AI can really deliver benefits.
Powerful. What a brain.
Amazing. The policy one community is very excited about this. So I think for me, I have got something much more personal. I've got my Ray-Ban Meta smart glasses with me. So these are glasses that have AI agents in them. And there's a couple of things that are really fun about this. One is it's liberating me from my smartphone because I can do a whole bunch of things hands-free without taking my phone out of my pocket. But also amazing for accessibility, right? If you've got visual impairment and you can have your glasses describe a scene in front of you or read a sign to you that you couldn't read otherwise, that's phenomenal. And the thing which I've tried, which is in early access now, is live translation. So you can speak to me in French or Italian or Spanish, and I will hear it in English. And as someone who did terribly in languages at school, that is a real win.
I've seen the demo. It is jaw-dropping. As a linguist, I'm just, rethinking everything in my career so far. Thank you. Thank you for lifting the veil and lifting our spirits. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, your expert panel.
Fantastic. Thank you. Please give our panel a huge round of applause. I think you'll agree that was a very illuminating session and certainly gave me pause to think on the real complexities of legislating in such a fast-paced industry. So a huge thank you. We now have a 10-minute break, and then we are going into a session where we're looking at how legal co-pilots can make a real difference to our businesses. So the juicy discussion of contracts, which actually underpin everything that we do. So it's going to be a very valuable and practical session to close out. Thank you.